Welcome to Talkin Science, where we dive into the science and stories making headlines in the world of science and space. I'm Matt Miller. Dr. Brad Tucker is here. Brad, happy Tuesday.
How's it going?
Really good, my friend. Really good. Let's dive into the headlines for this, the 22nd week of 2021. We're off to Venus. NASA announces 2 missions to our other planetary neighbour. SpaceX and Axiom Space agree to fly 3 more private astronaut missions to the space station. And Jeff Bezos and his brother are going on the first Blue Origin flight. Brad, winter has arrived, making late-night astronomy trickier with gloves and coats needed to survive the temperatures. And I love talking to you about the temperatures because it makes you chuckle. Because I'm up here in Queensland where it's supposed to be nice and warm.
Yeah, we're expecting snow tonight. Tomato. And our interstate school students who are coming up for a visit today will be freezing.
Pack your woolies, kids. It's always fun to jump up to Mount Stromlo. Looking forward to doing that in a couple of weeks with you, Brad. Very excited for our Canberra road trip. But before we get into the show, a quick reminder of the socials. We can find you on Twitter at btucker22. I'm on Twitter at Mirimat86 and, of course, Trekzone exclusively on Twitter. Plus, find our YouTube channel for the latest eps and on your podcast app of choice. And you can get behind-the-scenes goss and early access to all Trekzone podcasts by becoming a member today. Click the join button on any Trekzone video. Go to the Trekzone/support or put your phone up to the QR code on screen right now. Brad, first up in our headlines, squid and tardigrades, extremophiles, have been launched into space on the latest commercial resupply mission.
Yeah, this was an interesting biological experiment, really testing both in the case of the tardigrades and the squid, looking for specific genes or markers that identify them, how they adapt, especially in that case of the tardigrades, which have been shown to survive harsh temperatures and environments. Is there a specific thing that they can find that triggers their adaptation or their surviving in space, which then can hopefully be used to help our future human space travelers?
A new collaboration between Victorian industry and academia will be developing technology that will be providing protective coatings to rocket engine components as we move forward with the Australian space industry.
Yeah, look, it's just one of these further developments of trying to do everything in-house, right? All of that development, that capability from building to developing to testing to launching, and in getting quickly on board what everyone's wanted, that good mixture of the private industry sector, small companies as well, and the university sector and the government.
Well, Brad, we're off to Venus. Some say finally.
Some say finally, except Venus. No. Venus is glad we've been harassing Mars. And look, it is probably time we return to Venus. And there's a very, I think, good reason. That being, it's hard to survive Venus, as the Russians showed when they landed there in the 60s and 70s. Venus is a harsh environment, which means anything getting to Venus is hard. And now that technology is coming a little bit more and it's a little bit easier to do, well, now's the time to take a stab at it. And with some recent studies showing that it's also more interesting than we thought. The NASA selection of these 2 missions, it wasn't surprising, I guess, necessarily, but it was exciting, let's say.
Well, they're part of NASA's Discovery program. The missions will work to understand how Venus became an inferno-like world when it's otherwise so similar to Earth, Brad.
Yeah, if you think about it, you kind of have Mars on one end where it's mostly carbon dioxide, but very dry, less atmosphere, weaker atmosphere, less water, but there is water. You have Earth kind of in that middle, and then you have Venus on the other end where a lot of carbon dioxide as well, but it's swung the completely different way. Instead of being dry with low atmosphere, dense with a heavy atmosphere, which then has created a very warm planet. So you have the 2 opposite ends of the spectrum with Venus and Mars. So it tells us a lot about, by looking at Venus, in addition to all the work we've done on Mars, it puts Earth in perspective, as well as the potential evolution of Earth, what may or may not happen.
Well, the current thinking is that eons ago, Venus may have been the first habitable world in the solar system, complete with an ocean and Earth-like atmosphere, Earth-like climate, Brad.
Yeah, we think Venus and Mars both were probably similar to Earth billions of years ago. A decent atmosphere, water, rich, habitable. They're both in the habitable zone. That's the thing. When we talk about exoplanets, planets around other stars and looking for those Earth-like planets, Mars and Venus fit the bill as well from a distance. Now, obviously, when we look up close, we see they're not like Earth. So trying to get that understanding and that scale is quite important. And also to understand just what may have gone wrong, for lack of a better phrase, what may have gone wrong to Venus.
Well, it's acronym time. It's my favourite part of Talkin Science. Da Vinci Plus is the deep atmosphere of Venus, investigation of noble gases, chemistry and imaging. But Da Vinci Plus certainly sounds a lot better. This one will measure the composition of the atmosphere.
Yeah, look, and that's kind of the really exciting one. I know seeing the whole planet as a whole with all the measurements is important. We're doing that around Mars, but really getting into that atmosphere is an interesting mission. We're talking about ingenuity quite a lot and its feat to flying on Mars. It's actually really easy to fly on Venus. There's so much atmosphere and air. It's easy to keep aloft. Even when Ingenuity flew, there was a lot of specifics that it wasn't actually the first flight on another planet. It was the first powered flight because the Russians actually had balloons that they flew in the Venetian atmosphere. They weren't controlled or anything like that. So not quite the same thing, but it's definitely a possible mission. And given that the atmosphere has shown signs in the past of being interesting, there may have been clues of a biosignature. It appears not to be the case anymore. The clouds or in the atmosphere seem to be where it's at to study.
And Veritas, or Venus Evasivity, radio science, INSAR topography and spectroscopy. I can put it down in the auto cue as much as I like, Brad. I've got to still say it. It's going to map out the surface of the planet to determine its history and just where along the evolutionary chain it lost its way.
And the primary purpose of tripping up people when you try and actually pronounce it.
Exactly. That's why we have acronyms.
Astronomy and space, we love our bad acronyms. You know that. This is none other. And this is, again, another important step. If we want to understand what happened to Venus and how Venus has changed, how it's different to Earth, you have to study all those different ways of measuring the planet. You can't just focus on one aspect. This is this other simple point that it's actually easier to get to Venus than Mars. Venus is closer in every measure than Mars. Venus is the closest a planet gets to Earth if you time it right, whereas the closest Mars still takes 7 months, much closer to Venus. And on average, it's closer to Earth as well. It's not the closest planet, though, to Earth on average. That title is Mercury, but it means it's easier across the board, just time-wise getting to Venus, which means something like this doesn't necessarily have to wait for these 25 long-month launch windows. They can do it a lot quicker.
And it's the first time, I believe, in about 3 decades that NASA's returning to Venus. Obviously, they've had some slingshot maneuvers around the planet that I was having a look at in the research, but to actually go to Venus and study Venus specifically, this is the first time for NASA in 3 decades, since the 80s, I think it is.
Yeah, as you said, they've done some flybys when they were kind of on the way, so to speak. But really, this is the first time they've dedicated, as you said, a mission in decades to Venus. And it just goes to show a sign of, well, 2 things. How quickly and how cheaply you can build these missions. Now, they're still very expensive, but you can do them a lot quicker. The whole Discovery class program is for cheaper, quicker missions. And just how much the change in our knowledge of Venus has changed. And understanding that it's a very interesting place. There's still a lot to learn. And now technologically, there's a lot we can do to learn those things.
Well, Brad, next up, SpaceX and Axiom Space have announced 3 more private crewed flights to the space station.
We were talking about just a few weeks ago when they inked the deal with SpaceX and NASA to get their contract to the ISS. And they're not obviously waiting for that first mission to happen, realizing that they got a perfect or good relationship and that they want to get more people up there, as he said, announcing 3 spread over a couple of years, every 6 months to a year, all private crews going to the space station for those now what would be 4 missions.
Yeah, these dutifully named missions, AX-1, it's going to take off no earlier than January next year. Then AX-2, 3 and 4, they're all going to launch around 2023. Plenty of time to select the crew and train them up for their tour of the space station. As you say, Brad, these are private citizens heading up to the space station.
Yeah, and one of the big points or important points of this is the fact that this is signed so far in advance means that there will be options for a variety of people, potentially, depending on the requirements, employees, what they're looking for to get in. It's not naive to think that some other countries who may not normally go into space or send astronauts into space have a citizen that gets to go up, including, potentially as a stretch, even Australia. So this fact that they're inking these deals so far in advance means that they can do a lot more planning and, really make a big impact on this future of commercial human spaceflight.
Well, if all goes according to plan, Axiom is intending to launch their own private module to the station by the middle of the decade, with the goal of detaching it in 2028 and becoming a private outpost. This is pretty cool.
It really is. They want to build their own, as you said, and when eventually the space station is defunded, it becomes its own thing. But until then, have their own module on the space station. Just like there's a Russian and an American module, and they determine really who's spending time up there and who gets to ride up. This is how they're developing. And it's exciting. And for those who don't know Axiom Space, this isn't some sort of random company. This is actually started and partially operated by a former NASA administrator, as well as a number of former NASA employees and astronauts. So they kind of know what they're doing. They know how to do it. They know where their market is. And that's why they work so well with groups like SpaceX, the private companies, as well as NASA. They know what they're looking for. They know what they need. They know what they're doing. So it's one of those things where this isn't, I think, one of those dream shots where we hear of space hotels or whatever that may not really happen. If they say they can probably pull it off in a few years, they probably have a good chance of pulling it off in a few years.
Well, AX-1 will be SpaceX's first fully private crewed flight to the station, part of this opening up of space that we've talked about on Talkin Science, Brad. And it's not going to be alone. Plenty of other people with lots more money than you and I are willing to pay their way to 408 kilometres to spend some time on the station.
Yeah, look, there is a big change in how space is being accessed, not just in terms of rockets and satellites, but by people as well. And, we've talked a lot about in the past 10 years of people saying, well, tourism and space travel and private space travel is being a thing. We're now starting to get in the thick of it. All of these missions are being planned, the preparations happening, and it will no longer be a surprise when it happens in the next few years. It will just be another thing that happens. Oh, here's a new startup company. Oh, there's just another mission that goes on. It's going to be commonplace. It's going to be that big of a change, I think, in a very short amount of time.
Well, lastly this week, Brad, Jeff Bezos, head of Amazon, has confirmed he'll be one of the first crew to ride New Shepard to orbit, with his brother Mark joining him.
Yeah, look, we talked about in the headlines a few weeks ago when they announced that they wanted their first flight in July 20th. Not surprising that of the 6 seats, he said he's taking one of them. And I guess you have to do the good brotherly duty and as a billionaire of a rocket company and take your brother along.
Exactly.
So those 2 seats will be reserved for Jeff and his brother Mark on the first, what would be the first private commercial flight into space ever. Not the first space tourist, but the first tourism commercial flight.
Well, he's beating Elon Musk to the punch here, riding the rocket that he's poured his riches into. But do you think the SpaceX founder will try and beat his July 20th launch date, or at least join him by the end of the year?
So I think it's going to be very hard to beat it in that quick turnaround, given what they're doing. SpaceX does have that Inspiration 4 mission planned, paid by Jarek Isaacman, which I think is currently scheduled for September, October. So it's not surprising Jeff Bezos chose an earlier date. And again, July 20th being the anniversary of the moon landing. That's a very deliberate choice. I think it's going to be very hard to do. I think obviously they will push to make it happen this year, SpaceX. And I think there's going to be 2 ways that we see this whole situation play out. Not only just who says they get to be first, but who does the most flights, as we talked about last week with Virgin Galactic's flight and focusing on space tourism, and who offers what. SpaceX is always designed to go higher than Blue Origin. Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic were really kind of more just quick trips or tours into space, with Blue Origin going higher than Virgin Galactic. And as we've talked about before, both Blue Origin and SpaceX also have other ambitions besides tourism, doing things on the moon, going further afield. So this is, I think, one way to make a big statement of saying, hey, we're not this little outpost commercial company not doing anything. We can do it and we're ready. And here's the point to prove it.
Well, Blue Origin at one time was competing for lucrative NASA contracts. Now it seems to be going all in on the space tourism thing. And what better way to show confidence in your investment than riding it yourself and, I guess, taking your brother along for the ride as well?
Exactly. If I'm going down, you're going down with me. But as you said, right, that shows confidence, because it's one of the interesting things that we've never really talked about, and that is Elon Musk has never really expressed going up on one of these early flights of SpaceX. Yes, he's talked about Mars, but there's no mention of him really doing anything else. And I don't think that's anything more than to read of it, but that's not saying he doesn't believe in the system. Clearly he does. It's not saying he doesn't want to go into space. Clearly he does. But this is a very important way of making a point, as he said. Just as Richard Branson said he's going to go on his first flight to Virgin Galactic, it really builds that confidence, shows that capability. And also these people have dreamed of going into space. That's why they poured their billions of dollars to build these companies.
Exactly right. Well, New Shepard has been in development for almost 6 years, oftentimes in secret. They took a very different track to other companies, one that hopefully will pay off for them on July 20 and moving forward with plenty of paying customers.
Yeah, look, and it's very unclear of how much they're going to pay, but we do know the bidding for the first seat is still going, and I think as of today, it's 4.1 million Australian dollars, and climbing higher, I think, than the rocket will go at this point.
It's out of our price range now, isn't it, Brad?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was out of the price range when it opened up, to be honest. I was like, $5, I'm out.
Yeah, done. Well, look, Brad, in all, it's an 11-minute ride up to about 100 kilometres. What will Jeff and Mark experience?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot, but that technically is the boundary of legal space. They get to feel and experience space. They'll get to see weightlessness. They'll get to see the curvature of the Earth. They'll get to see that sort of blackness thing. Keeping in mind that the astronauts in the space station orbit about 400 kilometers. So you're about a quarter of the way to where the space station is. And so it's enough to get that space experience. I think the best way that I've been describing it is it's like a harbor cruise, right? You're not going across the ocean. You're going on a short trip to experience it and have some fun, all of which they will get on their flight.
Well, just before we go, Brad, a look ahead to this week's Talkin Science interview. Professor Andrew Hopkins will be beaming in this week from Macquarie University. He's led research into the galactic plane for the first time as part of a wider evolutionary map of the universe study, which is being researched from around the world. Incredibly, the team managed to measure more than 3,600 compact radio sources just in the Scorpio field, many for the first time. So it seems like we can now look into previously thought quiet zones and find a lot of activity. We'll be finding out about the Scorpio field and the EMU when Professor Andrew Hopkins beams in on the next Talkin Science. Of course, that'll be available Thursday at 11:30 a.m. GMT, or if you're watching us in the future, click the card in the top right of the video or follow the links to our website at Trekzone.org. Another quick reminder too, you can get behind the scenes goss and early access to all Trekzone podcasts by becoming a member today. Click the join button on any Trekzone video or go to the Trekzone/support. Brad, it's always great to pick apart the stories of the week with you. Let's do it again next week.
Sounds good.
Keep up to date with Twitter. Catch new podcasts daily on YouTube. Plus, we're beaming to your favourite podcast app 5 days a week. Just search for Trekzone and subscribe.